Well, good day, everyone. This is Suzette Chang with Thick Descriptions, where we disrupt traditional educational methods with anthropology, building stronger communities. Very grateful to be in partnership with Respect for Diversity, another organization that is committed to education. And we have the pleasure of having Mrs. Kendra Wesson here. So just so everyone knows, Kendra and I met by email, then phone, like within the last 2 months, give or take.
Correct.
That sound about right?
Yes.
And about a month ago, give or take, we were on the phone, which I think was meant to be a 30-minute conversation. And like an hour plus later, it was like, okay, we're going to do this. So I'm saying this to say we connected.
For sure.
Yes. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Most definitely. So just to kind of set the framework, what caught my interest in interviewing you is your connection to the Oklahoma State Department of Education. And then as you and I talked more, we are mothers, we are very committed to education, we are travelers, there's a lot of connection going on. So when you and I talked and you're like, well, what can we talk about? And after we talked about so many different things, it's like, this is what we're going to talk about.
Yes.
And we're just kind of
all the things.
Yeah, all the things. And we're just going to kind of let it roll. And that's typically how this podcast operates. We identify a topic that we can lean into. And then as we talk and engage, it just kind of unfolds. So with that said, tell our audience a little bit about you.
Okay. Well, I grew up here in Oklahoma. I lived in Native American housing the first few years of my life. I'm Native American and went to probably around 9 schools from kindergarten through senior year.
Okay.
And so I learned to adapt to change very quickly and to fit into different groups very quickly.
So real quick, so you did the shifting because?
So my parents were teenagers when I was born.
Got it.
And I think I maybe have one memory of them being married. So they got divorced when I was really little, single mom. And, in those days, sometimes moving could erase past debt and give you a fresh start. So, and we also had different boyfriends and spouses that came in the picture. So there was just a lot of moving. And then one year I lived in Florida with my dad. My 9th grade year, which was a great experience. And, I had children very young, now have a total of 8. The oldest is 31.
That's right. I remember you saying that. Wow.
And when I was in my early 30s, I went to college for the first time and graduated. I now have 3 degrees, mostly in accounting.
Literally, you have 30.
3.
Okay.
I'd love to have 30. I worked in accounting for a good decade before I went to school. There were a lot of things I just didn't realize. I didn't realize there were ways my school would be paid for. I didn't even know my tribe would pay for school. So once I got all the logistics figured out, off I went to school. So I worked full time, went to school, and had 4 kids at home at that time. And so a couple of years ago, probably 2021 or the end of 2020, I started serving on a local school board that my kids did not attend the school, but they asked me to come in and look at finances, and they knew that I had some expertise in that area. So I started serving on a school board, and then that just led to meeting other people and being involved in other things. And then a few years after that, I was asked to be on the State Board of Education.
Got it. Okay. And so what is the process to be asked? Like, was it the governor that asked you? Was it the superintendent? What's the process or what was your process? Because I'm not sure if that process is still the same.
So the process is the same. The governor of the state of Oklahoma appoints to several boards, and these people are his appointees. So the Board of Education has 6 of those. And then obviously the superintendent is a statewide elected official. And I feel like that's probably unique among Oklahoma's boards. So it's a very unique board. It doesn't run the way a local district would run. As local districts, the board of directors is elected, and then they hire the superintendent. So this board is unique. The superintendent is an elected official. So you got a board here, and they don't
Mhm.
necessarily have the ability to control him the way
Mhm.
that a local school board can control the superintendent that they hire.
Got
So that's
it.
one of the biggest differences I found.
Got it. And that's very significant
Yes.
as we, not thick descriptions, but Oklahomans and Americans as a whole, we are learning civics. We are getting a better understanding of how legislation operates from city, county, state, federal, so on and so forth. And what is a consistency is none of them are the same.
That's right. So in Nebraska, for instance, their board runs for office, and then they hire the superintendent, just like our local districts do. So I have found, and I think it's beautiful. Each state is unique. The people are unique, and they all govern in a different way.
Agreed.
And I don't think I realized that until I was an adult, how
Right.
different that was, because we
Agreed.
would focus on Oklahoma, and then we
Right.
focus on national.
Right.
So
Right. And I think it's extremely important for our listeners to understand that those differences, regardless if you agree or disagree, it's our laws. That's what our laws say.
that's right.
That in Oklahoma, for example, our education superintendent is elected,
Mhm.
not, I want to make sure I'm using the right word. He is elected by the people. He is not hired.
Correct.
Okay, there it is. Okay, so you were contacted by Governor Stitt,
Mhm.
and when did your service begin?
January of 2023. So I
Okay.
just completed my second year.
Okay, and so I want to provide context, and you are welcome to contribute to this as well. Everyone keep in mind the height of the pandemic happened in 20. So from 20 to 22, things were rather sticky in a variety of ways. What is a consistent throughout the country and the world is our educational systems. If they were already fractured, they were pretty much broken during the height of the pandemic because we were all trying to figure it out. And I've said, it's just side note, I've said this in previous podcasts, and it's worthy of repeating, how something biological impacted every system, including education, in a way where many of our young minds and even adults that were in education at that time are still pulling out of the impact of the height of the pandemic. Let me say that. I do not want to suggest that COVID is completely gone, but at the height of the pandemic, which was from 20 to 22, we were all figuring it out. So it was a very challenging time. And so for you to come in right after the height of the pandemic, that is worthy to just put that in that feather in your hat as we're having this conversation. So, okay. So Governor Stitt reached out to you, you accepted the appointment, and kind of walk us through what that looked like for you that first year.
Wow, the first year was intense. Got my paperwork signed, started serving. The first board meeting in January, we immediately began to go over the budget for the education of the whole state, right? And it was a budget that had been prepared by the former superintendent. So everyone's laying fresh eyes on it, trying to ensure that we're putting things in place and things are where they go. And especially me being an accountant, government accounting is much, much different than private accounting.
How so?
Well, the only way I can explain it is it seems backwards. So in private accounting, you're typically looking at the bottom line and you're trying to save money, reduce expense, increase profit. Well, obviously profit doesn't really exist in government accounting. So what you're doing is your revenue and your expense. And what I saw happening a lot is that people in government accounting tend to spend more in order to keep a certain budget, because if you don't show that you need that budget, they're going to cut your budget. And I always felt like that was the biggest fear. Our budget's going to be cut. So, you could always tell when budget time was coming because people were like, spend. We don't want them to cut. And that just never, it's very hard when you're so used to cutting costs to get into that frame of mind. Then we went right into all kinds of things. Every board meeting was just packed. And then also learning the role of a board member, accreditation of schools, what huge responsibilities are there. Looking at should schools have to have a penalty because they didn't turn in their paperwork on time? What
Right.
happened reading through all the paperwork? Because they have the opportunity to say, hey, this happened. You know, our encumbrance clerk was ill and in the hospital. It was unexpected. So looking through that paperwork and deciding if this school that you already know probably doesn't have enough money is going to incur a cost at the state's, you know, request and have an expense that was unexpected. It's definitely not in their budget.
Right.
And it just, I dug in and I just started learning. And what I didn't know, I asked. I attended different classes if there was one available on budgets for schools, went to conferences and just fully immersed myself because that responsibility was ever present. And if I was going to sit in that seat, then I owed it to be responsible for that seat.
Right.
I was one of the board members that always listened to all the comments when rules were made. You know, the comments were made outside of a board meeting. They would have a special, you know, time for people to come and give their comments. And when my schedule allowed, I went and listened to those comments because I valued those people, even though there were times I vehemently disagreed with them, but I can value the time that they took to have a say in education. And that's a big thing about America, you know?
And this could be parents or teachers
anyone.
or anyone that wanted to offer a comment about how our education system is working here in Oklahoma.
Yes, or how they felt about a rule or how it affected them personally. And they just wanted to let us know. And I think all those things should be taken into consideration. And while we have to do what's best for everyone as a whole, I mean, maybe that's not everybody's ideal, but that's really the way it works.
Right.
And then you need to listen to people that are willing to come and give that conversation.
And so now I'm curious, were you typically the only board member that would listen to the comments, or were there others?
We had a board member at the beginning that went with me before she was moved off the board. And then recently I have been the only one, but I will say some of our board members drive as many as 5 hours into Oklahoma City, because you have the 5 congressional districts represented.
Right.
So if you have someone in the Panhandle, that's a 5-hour drive each way. So I'm in Norman, 20 minutes. It wasn't as tough for me.
Right.
So
and I guess virtual meetings were not an option.
Not on that. They were in person. And also I'm self-employed, so I have the ability to control my schedule. I'm not tied to a job.
9 to 5, for example.
So I was doubly blessed to be able to do that. Right. And I'm not saying that anyone else, you know, I'm not saying I'm the only one that took it seriously. Right. But it worked out for me. Right. And I'm very glad I did that.
Okay. And how often it was monthly?
So the board meetings monthly, we did all drive in for that. The rules, the comments on the rules, there's a public comment time, and that's once a year.
Got it. Okay.
So I sat through 2 of those.
Got it.
For multiple rules. And I just enjoyed the people. I enjoy the people that are there in opposition or in support. I don't know, I have this craving just to know their background, why they're there, where did that opinion come from, what was their perspective. You
want to understand.
Well, and it's different for all of us.
Correct.
What you have an understanding of,
correct,
I could never conceive of.
Correct. And vice versa.
Yes.
And that's the beauty, in my opinion, personally and professionally, as being a human being and a practicing anthropologist. We don't have to agree. We have to learn how to respect each other and find common ground.
Yes.
But yeah, another conversation. Okay.
No, I agree with you. I mean, we are on the same page.
So first year, you're delving in, you're taking trainings, you are getting more engaged and involved with comments and board members and the budget and learning the difference. And so for your first year, and let me ask this is a 2-year appointment?
It's a 4-year.
It's a 4-year.
So I finished someone else's term. And then I had another 4-year appointment at that time.
Got it. Okay. So started in 23. Okay. Got it.
April of 23, my second term started.
So technically you started at the height of the pandemic when you were filling.
Well, I think it's confusing. So the term, I finished someone else's term from January of 23 to April of 23.
There we go.
And then that second term started.
There we go.
It's kind of confusing, the language there. And I think I confused you. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
But yes, so I was just finished 2 full years.
Well, and side note, that's another reason why I think you and I connected because you understand the value of asking questions. If you don't understand something, ask. It's really simple. It's not that complicated, but okay. So we're on the same page. Okay. So you finish someone else's term. You are starting your term. What are some of the takeaways after finishing that first calendar year? What were some of your takeaways from being on the board?
I think the thing that really hit me hard, I come from a world of processes, procedures. If I have a new client, I create those for them. I always want to have a hit by the bus theory. If someone gets hit by a bus, we should be able to pick up and carry on what they've done for, we shouldn't have to start from scratch.
Right.
And one thing I noticed about these political offices is when the head of the table changes every 4 years or 8 years or whatever, a lot of that process goes with the exiting person, and they're not always there with the handbook to help the next person. And I think that's a real disgrace and a travesty, because that new person spends that full first year also learning the ropes. So blind leading the blind, maybe. And it's very different. Even coming from a school board, I had that experience. I knew how my local board I was on worked. It was profoundly different in this aspect, because now I'm on the other side of the table, which is really cool that the Lord gave me the chance to see both sides, and rare. And I do hold that as special.
Agreed. Yeah, I've had the privilege of serving on Harding Charter Prep's board. That was one of my first board experiences. And I think I shared this with you in our phone conversation. My son was attending and graduated from there. And the first year I just sat and watched, because this was not what I thought a board should look like. Just because I didn't think it should look that way didn't mean that it didn't thrive and function well. It was just new to me. And for me, it's important in most situations to, for the first year, just kind of sit back, definitely be involved, but just kind of sit back and observe, figure out who's doing what, the power dynamics, the climate, that, all the things that, let's say there was a transition that could have happened. And I like you, it was like, here, you come serve, welcome. Right. And unpacking what that looks like. And there are some things you can definitely communicate, like, we meet this time, this date, where, and so on. But like all the nonverbal stuff, you learn. And
if you're like me, I maybe didn't have a lot to say in those beginnings, because I wanted to ensure that I knew what I was talking about before especially in a meeting where there's press all along the wall. There's an audience. People are screaming at you as you're walking into the meeting. They're very high. It's a very high stress environment. So I want to be real careful that I knew what I was talking about and understood the way things worked. And so I think that's another reason I spent so much time trying to figure it out, because I want to make sure when I said something at that board table that there was some intelligence behind it.
And that's a very good point. Very valid. If you listeners don't know, Oklahoma has ranked in the bottom 10 as it relates to education for a while. And so that would definitely explain not only the media there, but those that are offering their frustration, disappointment, whatever the case might be. And some probably offered suggestions, and some just came to express their frustration.
That's right.
Because it is an open forum. Yeah, it wasn't, I'm pretty sure you all had some closed sessions, but for the most part it was.
It is ruled by the Open Meetings Act, and the only closed sessions would be executive sessions with private information.
Exactly.
But the comments were allowed. We had on-topic comments, and then we had just say what you like comments, and yes, those are colorful.
I like that word. It is very colorful, and it I know for me, in being in those spaces, not yours, but in those spaces, it has taught me to calm myself and not react, because that human being has a right to think and feel the way they do. It's not personal. It may not be the best venue for this, but you know what? It says open, so here we go.
I could not agree with that more. And that's how I always felt about it. In the beginning, I did have to work on my poker face a bit because some of it was shocking.
The words that came out of people's mouths.
Right.
Yes.
But then I learned, like I told you, this is Mr. And I'm just going to say XYZ because I don't want to, but Mr. XYZ, he drives every month 2 hours each way from Tulsa to tell me how terrible I am at my job. And there's some value in that because he's committed to it.
Right.
And I love that commitment.
Right.
Right. I mean, simple. It doesn't have to be personal. It's not, and that's the biggest thing, if you could ever give advice to a young person was please. And maybe this is the wrong way to say it, but you are not that important. It is not that personal.
Oh yeah. Where you use that language, it's not that serious.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. Okay. Now what? Yeah. Right.
Use it for fuel.
Right.
Use it for ambition.
Right.
Use it to do God's. Use it for anything.
Right.
Turn them lemons into lemonade.
That part. Okay. So takeaways, governance or this particular board definitely operated different than private. People spoke their minds. You learned how to develop a poker face.
Yes, ma'am.
And you understood a reason many of your fellow board members did not stay for the comments. They're driving 3, 4, 5 hours one way just to get to these meetings that were not held virtually.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. For everyone that's listening, I just want you to let that resonate for a moment. Oklahoma isn't as geographically, Oklahoma isn't as big as Texas. I've driven from one from east to west. It is huge. However, Oklahoma geographically, the land here is like you said, from the panhandle all the way to the east corner. It is a long drive. And so I applaud those board members for making not only that commitment, but holding themselves accountable to do that. Because if the board meeting is at 7 p.m. at night, that means you're leaving at least by 2 p.m. to get there and probably not getting home until the a.m.
Well, and what it looked like for them, so our board meetings actually start around 9:30.
Okay.
So they would have to come in the day before, overnight stay in Oklahoma City, and then get up because, I mean, I know they have gotten up at 2 or 3 a.m. and driven in, but you want to be fresh faced and ready to go. So a lot of them would stay the night. And, I know they wouldn't have traded it for anything, but there was sacrifice to that for them.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Wow. And so now I'm really curious. So virtual meetings were never an option, excluding at the height of the pandemic?
Well, I wasn't on that board at the height of the pandemic, so I don't remember, but there was a law that was put out last year. I thought that some state meetings could be virtual, but for our purposes
at that time, it was not.
We were never, have not ever had a virtual meeting.
Wow. Okay. So for you all that are serving and are making that commitment, I serve on another board where it's similar, and we've allowed board members to pivot. So if they want to attend virtually, they can. If they can do face-to-face, that's preferred, but not a requirement. So you all that make that physical sacrifice of driving, removing yourself from your families for a night, for pretty much for 2 days. Thank you. Okay. So, second year, I began to have these feelings like, okay, I've seen this before. I understand how this works. And then I could start to interject my opinion on how I felt about things. The processes, the procedures, those were concrete. And so now I'm like, okay, I understand how that works. So how do I feel? How do I think about it? And there were a few things in particular. We had Senate Bill 441 that put schools at 165 days. And something I felt strongly about was districts have the option to come in and ask for a waiver to go less than 165 days. Okay.
And I voted no on a lot of those because multiple reasons. One thing is I never believed that left school is a way to improve education.
Mhm.
The second thing is I would think about the little guy, the 4-year-old, the 5-year-old, the 6-year-old in rural areas. And a lot of these districts are rural districts.
Yes.
On that school bus. So typically in our schools, the younger kids eat lunch earlier, 10:30, 11.
Okay.
If mom or dad forget to pack a snack and you're on a bus until 4. I think a lot about hunger growing up as a hungry kid.
Right.
I just thought that was difficult for me to handle. So
Got it.
it's given to schools as kind of a reward. If you have good grades, good attendance, you can ask for this waiver. And then towards the end of my tenure, I noticed that these schools were also doing the waiver for less school days, but they were adding in a number of virtual days, some as many as 10. So by the time I did the math and I'd asked that superintendent, I said, okay, so you're getting a waiver. How many of those days are virtual? And they would say, however many, 8, 10, whatever.
Okay.
And then I started to realize, well, tell me, are you doing active instruction during these virtual days? And they would say, or a couple of them said, well, no, those are review days. So basically to me, they weren't instructional days. So now when you take the waiver to go down and you take the virtual days on top of that, there was a district that was at 145 days. And that was, I really wanted to monitor that. I really wanted to keep an eye on that.
Okay.
I struggled with that. And so there were things that I became passionate about over the 2 years that I wanted to see change. Attendance was a real issue.
Yes.
Lots and lots of languages being spoken in our schools.
Yes.
Lots of, and I'm going to, so lots of secrecy. And I think that really bothered me. When you come from a poverty family, family with addiction history, secrecy is never a good thing. And I started to feel this vibe of this secrecy that I'd grown up with. Let's not tell people what happens at home. You don't want DHS coming in and taking you away.
Right.
And I feel this same vibe of secrecy in our public schools.
Right.
And that really maybe bothered me more than other people because I've had that history.
Right.
But it did bother me.
Right.
And I really wanted to start to crack that open. Let's have these conversations, please.
Right.
Let's talk about it.
And can definitely relate to that. One of the disruptors that Thick Descriptions offers is STEAM. The A for us is anthropology. So it's STEM plus anthropology, and we do it during school breaks to help bridge the learning gap. We're very committed to rural Oklahoma. And what has and continues to be a challenge is earning the trust of administration and or teachers, because there is this assumption collectively that if something that they don't want known is known, that the worst is going to happen.
Yeah.
And so as we are building relationships with different rural spaces, rural school districts in Oklahoma, that has been a commitment, is creating a space where we're not only earning their trust, that we are able to consistently engage with them. And it's been challenging. It has been very challenging. So I'm saying all that to say completely understand. And kudos to you for listening to your gut. It's your intuition of something's not right here. I want to hold you all accountable. I want to show you all grace. I think I understand why you're doing what you're doing. It just doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to survive.
That's a great way to say that. May I ask you something? When you use the word anthropology in that context, can you help me understand a little bit more?
Yes. So STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, tends to focus on the quote unquote hard sciences.
Okay.
Anthropology is a combination of quote unquote hard and soft sciences. So anthropology focuses on language, focuses on biology, focuses on culture, and focuses on history. And implementing STEM without those factors, it's like teaching how to do A, B, and C and not incorporating the human component of A, B, and C.
Holistic is what's coming in my head. Holistic, holistic approach to the learning environment of a child.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I almost
Yes.
hesitate to ask, but I had to. I wasn't.
No.
Yeah.
Please ask. Yes, please ask. And so, where for us, holistic, and although I understand and appreciate it, it has so many variables.
Mhm.
Anthropology is pretty concrete in those four, because those four things help us understand human beings and our experiences. All of us have a history, all of us have cultures, all of us
Mhm.
have languages, and
Mhm.
all of us have a biology.
Yeah, I love that.
So, okay, back to you were talking about connecting with different rural communities, rural school districts, and creating a space for conversations. How did that go?
I developed some great relationships with
Mhm.
superintendents across the state who are
Mhm.
doing a fantastic job. Being a data-driven person, I can look at, I probably drove the State Department crazy because I'm always like, okay, I've got your synopsis, but can I see the data, please?
Mhm.
And so I get my little
Mhm.
spreadsheets out, because when you look at the data, you can start to see repetitive patterns.
Mhm.
And there were things I began to notice about school districts, for instance. And a lot of times in the accounting world, we break things down into units.
Correct.
And then you assign a cost to that unit, and
Correct.
it helps you kind of get closer to apples.
Correct.
Can't always get that way, but it gets you closer.
Correct.
And so what I started doing was looking at expenditures per student, per school
Mhm.
district.
Mhm.
And one thing that had been brought to my attention was there was a district that was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in travel. And I thought, is this extraordinary?
Okay.
And so pulled travel of the top 5 districts,
Mhm.
ran those down to cost per kid per
Mhm.
year,
Mhm.
looked at 5 years, top 5,
Mhm.
and realized that there was a district here in the metro, Moore Public Schools, who was spending about 8 to 12 per kid
Okay.
on average of their spending. So if you break it down into the kid unit, they're not
Mhm.
spending 8 to 12 per kid. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
They're spending $8 to $12 in travel per child that they're educating.
Mhm.
And so other districts were closer to 20,
Oh, wow.
the other big districts. So that was a huge variable there.
Yeah.
So I call him and I say, all right, I've been crunching some numbers.
Mhm.
He draws a breath. He's like, oh boy, what's coming? And I was like, you are doing a fantastic job. Would you share with me what you're doing so I can share it with other schools?
Mhm.
Well, sure. And I mean, the pride in that man's voice as he talked
Mhm.
about what he had done. And he
Mhm.
made a simple change. Instead of bringing teachers to the training across the U.S., embarking on
Mhm.
flights,
Mhm.
rooms per diem.
Mhm.
Now, some teachers may not appreciate this because
Mhm.
your little vacation may have
Right,
gotten
right.
thwarted, but
Right.
I know that we do get a little break when we go away on
Right.
conferences. It's not really vacation, but we get a little
Right.
break. He was training his curriculum directors, and large
Mhm.
school districts can do this. I don't think rural could because they don't have as many positions available, but he was training his curriculum directors to do the training.
Mhm.
And the bonus is so cool
Mhm.
because when a new teacher started, that training started immediately. That
Right.
teacher was immediately trained. We didn't
Right.
have to wait till summer
Right.
or a break.
Right.
And the cost savings, 40% cost savings. You cannot beat that. And I was
Right.
like, you are just a genius.
Right.
But he just did something real simple and he figured out what worked for his district. And I
Right.
love the individuality and the local control of districts to do
Mhm.
things like that because, as I said, that works in a large district in urban Oklahoma.
Mhm.
That would not work in a rural district of 200 kids. It
Correct.
would not be worth the spending on the training of the teacher. But there's just things like that are so different across our state.
Right.
And Oklahoma has you already know this, a very there's a big difference between our rural schools and our urban schools. And it is tremendous. And I think we have to appreciate that. And we have to appreciate that. If rural school, your superintendent might be a bus driver. He might be serving pancakes to tomorrow, and he's going to fill in the gaps, or she is going to fill in the gaps wherever they can.
Correct.
Whereas an urban school has more staff and they're able to
Right.
disseminate those duties out amongst
Right.
their people. And
Right.
it's beautiful how different all of this is
Right.
and how it collectively works together. But I would just like to see more educational focus on getting our kids at reading level. And for me, if that was the starting point we went to, if we just said, shut down Oklahoma, every child's going to read at their grade level before we do anything else,
Mhm.
what a world that would be. And what an
Right.
improvement that would be.
Right.
And reading is a huge part. Did we talk about Sold a Story? You had listened to that podcast,
Yes.
hadn't you?
Yes.
That podcast literally changed my life in the world of education. I mean, I get goosebumps when I think about her and the work she put into that and the way she explained it. And guys, it doesn't matter. It's not about anything other than just this small thing we can do in education to get kids where they need to be. And
Small
then they
and
will
consistent.
thrive. Yes.
Right.
I was such a good reader. And I always have people ask me, what changed for you? How did you come out of the life you had into probably honestly a place that no one ever dreamed I'd be? And you know what changed for me? In kindergarten, remember when we used to read the classics and you get that little star on your diploma?
Yes.
I remember my teacher and my principal having a meeting because I had gotten so many stars for the books I read. They didn't know where to put them. My diploma was covered. What do we do for her? She's read so many books.
Right.
And I, at the time, felt bad because I created a problem for them. But looking back on that, I could not be prouder of that 5-year-old. And that's what changed. The reading, the escaping. We didn't have children's books in my house. We had adult books. I read Stephen King at 10 years old, had nightmares for 5 years.
Oh,
but
gosh, and I love Stephen King, but that was too early. That was too early.
And it was the Salem's Lot.
Ooh.
Yeah. So made my mom buy garlic, like all the things. But
that's funny.
I had a vampire escape plan. Trust me on that. But so I was reading adult books, but I was also escaping. I was reading, Moby Dick, and I go to my grandma who's in the kitchen, and I'm like, I want to use these big words I learned in Moby Dick that day because she'd sit me on the porch to read because I was driving her nuts. My grandma was way too old to be raising me. And I came back in and she's making spaghetti, right? And the spaghetti's sticking out of the pot. And what's our rating on this show? I'm not using a bad word, but it's a physical.
It's adult.
Word. Okay. So the spaghetti noodles are sticking out of the pot. And I look at her and I go, Grandma, those noodles are sticking out of the pot, just like the testicles on an octopus. And she goes, she stops stirring the spaghetti and she looks at little 5-year-old, or I think I was about 8 then, a little 8-year-old me. And she goes, what I want you to do is I want you to grab the dictionary, honey, and look up that word. Okay. So I go to the dictionary, I look up that word, and I had to look up 2 more words.
Well, yeah.
That. And I come back and nobody ever said a word. Nothing was ever said. But that was not the proper use of that word. But
you mean
that
tentacles.
Reading, yeah, I did. And the funny thing is I think about her face because my grandmother's Native American. She's very beautiful and prim and proper. And I looked at her face never changed. She just says, why don't you go look that up in the dictionary? And I think about the wisdom in that moment because she could have laughed at me.
Yes. She made it an educational moment.
She took that and said, okay, I know you made a mistake.
Yes. Let's correct this.
But the reading piece is just huge. And I encourage people to, I wish I could do a post and say, hey, everybody grab the child next to you, get a book at their reading level and have them read it to you. And I think it would be an eye-opening experience.
So it is proven, and I'm putting my library hat on for previous years of being a librarian. If we read with our children for 20 minutes a day, that's it. It's not hours. It's not days. It's just consistently 20 minutes a day. Their reading comprehension and critical thinking skills improve greatly over a really short period of time. We're talking just like a couple of months. It's not this. Yes.
And I can even break that down a little further, if I may. I was talking to a young parent and they expressed, and guys, these young parents, they have so many things coming at them, much more than we did as young parents. The struggle is real. And they were like, great. So I'm supposed to spend 20 minutes of my day now. I've worked all day. My kid's home from school. We're all tired. And I'm supposed to sit down and read these 20 minutes. And I'm like, but there's other ways to do that too. It doesn't have to look like my child sitting in my lap reading a book. We do street signs.
Yes.
We do grocery store lists.
Yes.
We do scavenger hunts for the groceries that we're shopping for with a list. Reading comes all over the place. Same with math. Count the change back. Do the tip. Do the tip on a credit card receipt. All these micro moments of learning.
Yes.
I think it can be overwhelming when you're like,
Yes.
It is for me, especially because you already know I move fast. I don't sit still. The thought
Mhm.
of sitting for 20 minutes just gives me anxiety. But there's these micro learning moments that layer upon each other, and the words can get harder and harder. You
Right.
start with letters on a tag.
Right.
Then you move to reading the sign.
Right.
Oh, the day my kids could read street signs. Those are happy days, and they're celebration days. You read that street sign, and then you talk about what happens because they can read the street sign. Wow, in a few short years, you'll be driving. It's important you know what these signs are. So the hope and the respect of their reading, it's just huge for them. You're hitting all the boxes.
Yes.
Praising, learning,
Yes.
all the things.
Yes.
So parents, just do that.
Yes.
Just take those moments.
Yes. And so I personally, I can relate to that parent or parents
Me
that
too.
came to Oklahoma, was not degreed, was not quote unquote educated, and so had to make a very hard decision of, am I working full time or am I going to school full time? And initially it was, I was going to school full time. And so by the time I got home, my kids got home, we're all exhausted.
Yeah.
I get
Truthfully.
it. Yes, especially Monday through Friday. I'm exhausted. So yeah. Oh, let's read the Lysol can. No, not trying to get any pull up to Lysol. It's just what we did. Oh, here's oh, we're cooking. What are the ingredients that I need? How do you pronounce that word? Oh, that's not saga, that's sage. We're
I do that too, the deliberate mispronunciation.
Yes.
Because guess what? Kids love teaching their parents.
Yes.
It is so cool to them, and they feel this empowerment.
Yes.
And
those have been my best educators of my two
amen.
kids. Yes. Agreed. Where maybe on a Saturday and or Sunday, we might be able to sit down for 15, 20 minutes and actually sit and read. Or after and as my kids got older, not only reading and the goal was that we would read something together. And I have to laugh when you were talking about reading Moby Dick and Salem's. I remember my son reading. Oh dang it! Oh gosh. It'll come to me in a moment, but it was he was like 11 years old, and it was definitely inappropriate for him. It was a very popular book, and I remember saying to him, because he's like, I'm going to read it, and I said, okay, you've read it, but do you understand it? And he sat there and looked at me. Well, no, I don't. So why are you going to read it? And he read it, and I remember from that point on, he did not take on anything that he could not handle in that capacity, especially when I'm telling you, it's not that you can't read, your comprehension is not there yet. It'll get there. But yeah, in addition, after you've read this book, and this is something we do in our STEAM projects, after you've read this, let's do some critical thinking.
Yes. That's good.
How does this situation apply to this or that or this? And you start to see the light bulbs coming on, and it's really cool to watch. Really, really cool to watch. But okay, so you're talking to parents, you're encouraging them to read to their kids. I'm glad you know about the 20-minute rule. And it sounds as though you are definitely engaged and invested in this responsibility.
Yes. I was a great time in my life. It was a huge responsibility, but it was also very rewarding. And I'm a lifelong learner. So anytime we talk and I do accounting across many different industries, and the reason why I enjoy that so much, whereas it up for me and keeps it interesting, because accounting, although I make it quite fun, it is very boring. So yeah, it was a very rewarding time.
Okay. And so takeaways from your second. If it is approved, then fine. If it's denied, then the parent has the right to petition
That's right.
that decision be rescinded. And the process is going through the school board.
They would go to their local superintendent. If they're denied their local school board, if they're denied there, they have the option to come to the state board of education. My understanding was in the past, those had never been overturned. We definitely overturned a couple by the end of it.
Do you remember what was the circumstances?
I do, and I can be real generic, but those
yes,
are executive
please.
session conversations. But let's just say sometimes people are in a district and they have to move out of their home, and they don't move very far, and they maybe forget to check the district of the home, the new home.
Okay.
And so they may be closer to, why is the word escaping me? In miles to the old district, but they happen to be in a whole new district,
Right.
boundary wise.
Got it.
And so those are awful. Or they maybe got in a little bit of trouble, and there's a caveat in the transfer that if you're a discipline issue, the school has the right to refuse, but
Right.
they feel like the school misunderstood
Right.
the discipline issue, and they feel like that they weren't really a discipline problem. That was
Got
a
it.
misunderstanding, right?
Got it.
Things like that.
Got it.
We had many different scenarios, but
And this process can take from 3-6 months?
yes, it's terrible because and that was always heartbreaking for me, because if you start this process, I'm like, okay, so school starts August, and they say we don't accept your transfer. So where do you go until January when it's finally fleshed out? Like where's this child supposed to be? And that was disturbing to me, because having changed schools so much, I know what that feels like to go to a new school, and so that was really. Again, perspective, experience, those things come into play.
Right.
There were people who had never experienced that. So they
Right.
didn't have an understanding of the trauma of walking into, and I think rural schools were the toughest
Yes.
to walk into and be welcomed and belong.
Right.
The big schools, you could kind of hide in the crowd. No one really knew if you were
No.
new. But a little school like Luther, Harris, schools
Right.
I attended, they're very, very small, and
Right.
you were the new kid
That's
forever.
right. That's
you
right.
never lost that title.
That's right. That's right.
So it's really different.
That's right. And that is consistent with my personal experience not being a native Oklahoman. I consider myself an Okie now, but when I came here 20 plus years ago, I was the outsider. And so collectively here in Oklahoma, most people, they grew up together. They went to school together. Their parents knew each other. And so coming here and not having those experiences, and I still have that from time to time coming into different spaces. I get the look of, we don't know you, not because you're female, not because of your ethnicity. We just don't know you. Right. So yeah.
Yes, it's and then in my younger years when we're living in Indian housing, there was also the secondary layer of the tribe I belonged to, and also the way I looked. You can see me, maybe our audience can't, but I'm blonde hair, blue eyed, so I don't necessarily fit the Indian narrative. And so it was always, not only was an outsider in that rural school, but I was also a native. I was not Native American enough.
Right.
So,
right.
But yeah, I mean, those are things, and I think those things are trials that we learn from, and they're intended so that as we continue our life, we're learning and growing from those trials. And I've always looked at those as just learning experiences.
Agreed. And I choose to believe, I'm going to put my anthropologist hat on, that as we grow and evolve as human beings, we'll see those experiences as definitely lessons and an opportunity to see our humanness. At the beginning and end of the day, we're humans. Our experiences are different based on the systems that we've created and sustained, and we are human, period. And we're not there yet. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. And not just Oklahoma, the world as a whole. Because I choose to believe that when we see each other as human beings, much of what is happening around the world, not just in education, but around the world, it won't happen. Because we will see this person as someone that needs a roof over their head, clothes on their back, food in their stomach, a health care, quality health, and quality education. Those basic necessities should not be negotiable for anybody. But Anyway, so year in, you are learning these things, and now this is
25.
Okay, so 2025 rolls around, and what happens?
Well, the governor decided that my services weren't needed anymore.
And the reason you were given?
The official press release that went out was that NAEP scores were low.
And
NAEP, N-A-E-P. I know that acronym always escapes me.
National
Association Exceptional. Ooh, it's a rating system.
Yes.
That rates education.
Correct.
Through testing.
Correct.
So
Yeah, I having a brain fart on
I
the
know,
acronym.
totally cannot. And it's a weird acronym anyway. NAEP scores were low.
Mm-hmm.
And political drama.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I want to make sure that our listeners heard again that our superintendent of education for the state is elected, and that ties into, in my opinion, the political drama that you're referencing. Not that he was elected, but that he is not necessarily governed or held accountable by the board. Is that a fair statement?
It's fair, and I think the understanding is the role. Let's talk about the role the board plays. So
Yes.
the role the State Board of Education plays is an agenda is put out
Yes.
by the state superintendent, who's also the chairman of the board. This
Yes.
is how most boards work.
Yes.
The agenda is put out. Oklahoma's Open Meetings Act
Yes.
requires that you only speak to what is on the agenda. And
Correct.
this is important because they didn't want boards coming together and talking about things that the public wasn't aware of. And so if you're a fan of transparency,
Right.
this is a very important thing to happen.
Right.
So here you are at a board table.
Yes.
And you're tied to only what's on that agenda. So you can
Yes.
have opinions about whatever you like
Yes.
in your head.
Yes.
But you cannot go speaking about those opinions at that table because now you've broken an Open Meetings Act, which is
Correct.
punishable.
Correct.
It's against the law.
Yes.
It's illegal.
Yes.
I don't know how else I can say that.
Yes.
It's wrong.
Yes.
And so the way I learned to approach my role was, okay, and decisions aren't always black and white.
Correct.
They're often somewhere in the middle.
Because humans aren't black
Right.
and white.
And education, the biggest piece of humanity,
Right.
right? Like people's children, their grandchildren,
Yes.
our future
Yes.
collectively.
Yes.
So the way I learned to approach it was I really tried to think about when Governor Stitt appointed me, he said, I want a champion for kids and someone who's going to think about Oklahoma's kids. So I tried to approach the role that way.
Mm-hmm.
Adults are much easier. They're more malleable and able to understand meanings behind things. So let's try to do what's best for the kids, and then the adults can conform. It's kind of, maybe that's something I just came up with to say,
Okay.
to express it, but that's really kind of how I tried to approach it, was kids
Okay.
first. Kids first. What helps that child get the education? Because what our Constitution promises is an education.
Correct.
So shouldn't that be the focus of what I'm
Yes.
doing at that table?
Yes.
Right. So that's how I tried to approach it.
Yes. And let me ask this. Did you and the governor ever have a conversation of what it meant to him?
Ooh, that's a great question. No. I
Okay.
think Kendra just assumed that what that meant was do right by our kids.
Right.
And
Understood.
so that's my understand. That's my position and what I took from it. And I never clarified that. Just
Yeah.
to clarify that, I never clarified
Right.
it.
Right.
But so when you're sitting there and you're thinking about new curriculum standards, are these going to improve the education of the kids?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are they going to? And if they're not, then time can be better spent.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the easy thoughts, right? The easy things that you were more able to see. Then there became harder conversations. Conversations like, if you have a teacher and she has a non-English speaking student in her class, how are we ensuring that the other 25, 26 kids are getting all the attention they deserve too?
Right.
And those are tough conversations, and they're heartbreaking, and we all love children. But I'm willing to have those conversations, and I'm willing to find solutions for that. And we need to, because these kids, non-English speaking kids, or kids who don't have a status of being a citizen, what I saw happening that people didn't see happening on the outside was you get them through school, they graduate, say they go to a VOTEC and get their dental assisting degree.
Okay.
Now I've got my degree. I've done great. I'm a new American. I'm a part of this great melting pot. Right. My education's complete. Right. Do you know what happens to that poor little sweet child when they go to the board of dentistry?
Right.
They're not a citizen.
Correct.
They can now do nothing with all that work.
Right.
It really makes me emotional because it's not fair.
Agreed. They were promised something that
So we just need to fix it, right? We need to figure out, okay, so what can we do within the law to fix this? Change the laws.
Right.
Fix it. Let's talk about it.
Right.
But we can't keep hiding it and pretend like we don't have 71 languages spoken in Oklahoma City schools.
Mm-hmm. And that's just in Oklahoma City.
Yes, ma'am.
That's not including the state.
That's right. And Tulsa's the same way.
Yes.
So, so we're in this tug of war. We've got to protect these kids, but we have these kids over here too that need protected, and we're all the hearts of this issue on both sides are in the right place. No one wants to see children hurt.
Agreed.
I promise you.
Agreed.
Even the most evil people don't want to see children
Agreed.
hurt.
It is our how.
We have a culture,
Yes.
of protecting children, but man, the battle is real. And I'm not even let's not talk about what side of the fence we're on or where we're going with that. Those decisions are tough, very tough. And when you look at them from all angles, they become even tougher. So while it's appreciated that people like me do look at them from all angles, I think it also needs to be appreciated how much harder that makes the job for us, And so things like that were just, man, sometimes you're just like, wow. So where would I like to see us go? And with education, let's get our kids reading. Let's become solution oriented.
Right.
Let's give these children the best that we can within the confines of what we have.
Right.
And if the confines are too confining, let's break them.
Right.
Let's change them.
Right. Let's
make
figure
it
out
new.
something that will work. Right.
Because continuing to do the same thing. And also the language of, I know we talk about it a lot and it's a talking point, being last in education. What I'm starting to hear are our babies parroting that language.
Yes, you and I talked about that. Yes, ma'am.
And you'll hear them say, what do you expect from me? I have an Oklahoma education.
Right.
Oh, a dagger to the heart.
Right.
So we did talk about that. And so I will express that again to you and our listeners that let's have a language of hope.
Yes.
So we talked about Vermont, top 10. Vermont's
Yes.
number 10. We're within 10 points with the exception of one category of Vermont. So that's a very narrow bandwidth. There's hope there. I know my Oklahoma kids. They are just as bright as number one. I promise you that.
Yeah.
Maybe we're missing something. There's something we're not doing. You'll hear all kinds of pathways that people say have led to this. And that's a whole other discussion.
Right.
But for me, I know our kids are just exceptional. Agreed. There's been so many things come out of Oklahoma. Innovation.
Right.
We've got farm kids. We've got inner city kids. We've got everything you could want. There's 7 ecosystems. I know you know this across Oklahoma. And maybe there's 7 ecosystems of the types of children we have across Oklahoma. And they're fantastic.
Yes. I've had the privilege of advocating and working with rural spaces within the context of grant writing. And they'll say to me, well, we're rural. And I'm like, well, let's flesh that out. And what does rural mean to you? So, for example, I used to work in Guthrie. Guthrie has had the title of being rural, but because Edmond is growing and a lot of that growth is spilling over to Guthrie. And so although it is rural, it's not rural like Okemah, for example.
Or Nowata.
Or yes. And so there's different layers and understandings and meanings of rural, just like there's different for urban. It's for whatever reason, urban doesn't seem to get, in my experiences, doesn't seem to get as much of a need to flesh it out, where in rural spaces, you need to be able to define what that means. And you were saying earlier, and I've been preaching this for a while now, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I agree with you that there are some powerful and innovative processes going on as it relates to education here in Oklahoma. What is a consistent is our inconsistency.
That's good.
If, for example, if we decide to do this for a year, we expect by the next year that there should be a 50 to 60% improvement. Humans don't work that way. Humans work better when it's a 10, maybe 15% improvement, maybe even a 5. Now, after 4 or 5 years and we're still doing it, maybe we need to rethink it. But humans don't, especially kids, we do better, and I'm identifying as a kid at this moment, we do better with consistent, steady and consistent. We do collectively. Now, I get that from the internet, social media, all the influences that are going on, it doesn't encourage that. Kids just need steady.
They do need steady, and have an 8 of my own all the way down to 9. That is something that's very comforting to them.
Yes.
Consistency, steadiness. You can have the most disruptive, disorganized household, but there's ways to do things, and even your reactions can be consistent.
Yes.
And you're pointing out the changes. I remember on the board, the school board I was on, the local school board, we had our 8th grade. It was time to look at our 8th grade scores, and the head of school is up presenting to us. And I start to think, and I'm like, timeline, hang on a second. And I say, wait a minute, were those 8th graders? I think it was 8th grade, maybe it was 5th grade, but whichever. Were they 3rd grade COVID babies? And he was like, yes. And I was like, well, okay, this is why they're reading. They had an entire year of loss. So immediately I'm like, our school's still doing okay.
Exactly.
There was just something traumatic that happened in the middle of it.
Exactly.
And when the trauma involved the whole class, the whole grade, you can see that clearer.
Yes.
But what if the trauma only involved 1 kid or 2 kids?
But it still impacts that entire class.
Sure does. It does.
Hence the anthropology of it. Yes.
That's it. I see how that ties in now. Ties in nicely.
Yes. It's not just critical thinking, it's context. And we started this conversation, which is about time for us to wrap it up. I know. When there is an emergency, like life-threatening emergency, yes, we need to drop everything and do what we need to do. A house is on fire, whatever the case may be. And I applied that language to Oklahoma. The weather here, if you don't like it, just be patient. We're knocking on the door of tornado season. Our inclement weather has really been interesting, and I'm saying that with all the sarcasm I can generate just in the last 30 days, from 80 degrees in the morning to I can't close my door to my car because the wind is blowing so hard by the evening, and the list goes on and on. And I think it's not just Oklahoma. I think the world as a whole is just experiencing this. But the reason I bring this up, when there is an emergency, Oklahomans rally around each other nobody's business as it relates to a tornado. Someone's house has been blown away, a building, lives are lost. We are a survivalist state. Yet when things have calmed down, we go right back to business as usual, assuming that the way we've always done it is still working, and it's not. Especially as it relates to education. I will also say that I have done research where what you and I are talking about, models of education have happened, where parents and guardians and neighbors were all invested in little Johnny's education. And if mom had to work, by the and couldn't get home by 5, 6 o'clock. Between 3 and 5, little Johnny was with someone that was pouring into his education.
You're so right about that.
We worked together because it wasn't about, and don't get me wrong, I do social media, but it wasn't about what's the cutest this or that. It was about Johnny's education, because we knew at some point in time, little Johnny was going to grow up, and we needed him to be as educated and empowered as we could give our time, volunteering, whatever you want to call it, to invest in him, because he's the next generation. Him and his all the other, and somewhere along the line, that model of investing, consistently investing in little Johnny, has been put to the side because we're arguing about things that don't support little Johnny. And that's the things that can bring me to tears, because I've seen these, like I said, I've done the research of different school districts from the 50s and 60s that were powerful here in Oklahoma, and even prior. I mean, they took education to a whole nother level. When you go into their schools and you see the trophies, and most, if not all of them, some had strong sports. Most, it was high academic achievement. They did not play about that in any way, shape, or form. Right. And somewhere along the line, we've lost that. And so, to me, personally and professionally, that's a way, is we make education a top priority. It's about the kids as a reason why you became a board member. You took it seriously of, yeah, I may not like this or like that, but how is this impacting little Johnny? Okay, let's focus on little Johnny.
It's the way, and I'm seeing that. You said a way, it's the way, because what I'm seeing is less influence of the elders on the youngers. So when you're a young mom, like I was, 21 years old, 3 kids, that 13 years of education seemed like 100.
Yes.
But now I'm a 50-year-old mom, 8 kids.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, was it a drop in the sand?
Yes.
Drop in the bucket of time. A drop.
Yes.
And so we used to have the 50s and olders who knew how short that period was, and they encouraged and they impressed.
Yes.
But now it was a culture of everybody mind your business. They got this figured out.
No, we don't.
So we've got to encourage our young parents the importance of education and how short that time is with them.
Right.
It is so short.
Right. Agreed.
12 years. Life expectancy around 80 maybe now.
Right.
12, 13 years.
Right. And it goes by quick.
I feel like for me, I mean, I encourage older, or what we used to call our elders.
Right.
Give that advice.
Right.
Give it. Tell them. Don't be shy. Don't feel like you're stepping.
Right.
We're all worried about overstepping. Nah.
Right.
Overstep. Give that advice.
Right.
They'll take it or they won't.
Right. But at least you know you tried to plant a seed.
Yeah. I mean, and I know there's a lot of people that disagree with me on that, but that's okay, because I agree with myself. And I feel like they need us, but they don't know how to ask for us.
Right. Right.
They do need you.
Right.
And they may act like they don't.
Right.
They need you. They need help raising those babies. They need everything, all the things. Pour it out.
Right.
Don't stop.
As we wrap this up, Lawrence, I think this is the first time in you recording. And Lawrence, say your name. Lawrence what? Johnson. Lawrence Johnson. And say who you're with. There we go. Jam OK6 Radio wanted to give that shout out to him. There have been several times we've had the privilege of working with Lawrence, and most of the time, like 45 minutes in, he's like, you know when to wrap it up. We are now like an hour and 15 in, so obviously I lost it on this one, but it's okay because really good information. So as we wrap this up, what would you like to leave with our listeners?
Wow. Just a message of hope and encouragement. It can often feel like, especially after COVID, that things are just so dark, and they're really not. time marches on, kids grow up. We've got this. We just need to put more focus on education. And I think that is an easy thing to do when we get in one collective mind and spirit.
Right.
So let's get started.
Hopefully, this conversation has made our listeners a little bit more uncomfortable, because that's a commitment of this podcast, to get uncomfortable and do something. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes.